Imagine if there were a drug inspired by Nazi testing, synthesized by scientists who hated humanity, and funded by everyone from the Rockefellers to the Ford Foundation. And the people who created this drug had only one goal: the complete sterilization of everyone they deemed unworthy, from black to white, male to female, young to old. They don't care. Would you take it? If you're shaking your head no, then I have bad news for you. Not only is there a chance that you are taking it, even if you're not, the effects are just as deadly. What's this pill called?
Paragard. Estron Fe. Kylena. Marina. Nextstellis. Phexi.
It's gone by many names, but it's best known as birth control. Enter Margaret Sanger, who, while standing next to her coffin, is blaming her father for her mother's death. Growing up one of 11 children, Margaret hated her life, and when her mother died of tuberculosis, she believed it was the children that had killed her, inspiring her lifelong pursuit of global sterilization and genocide, which would bring her in touch with the elite and powerful, who would fund her version of the American dream, Planned Parenthood, and her final gift to humanity, the birth control pill. Inspired by Nazis in both technique and practice, Margaret used Planned Parenthood and the concept of birth control to begin her plans of mass sterilization. And who better to begin with in her mind than blacks? And before I read this, I would like to preface that this is a direct quote from Margaret Sanger. The most successful educational approach to the blacks is through a religious appeal. We do not want word to get out that we want to exterminate the black population. I'm sorry. Is this girl for real? And the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to the more rebellious members. I really struggled with that. It wouldn't end there though. Margaret would go on to produce books and other forms of propaganda full of these ideas. And if you'd like to look for yourself, check out the links below. The title is Margaret Hates You. But as the decades moved on and Margaret aged like a grape in the California sun, her plans grew more elaborate, and eventually she landed on the concept of the magic pill. For Margaret, this magic pill wouldn't stay magical for long. Soon after hiring Gregory Pincus and John Rock, two doctors with genocidal tendencies in the early 1950s, Margaret would receive immense amounts of money from Catherine McCormick, a stain of a woman who inherited her husband's massive fortune when he died. With complete funding and Pincus now in control of development, the team took to the history books for inspiration and seemingly couldn't help but land in Nazi Germany, specifically Auschwitz, because Margaret wasn't the first to attempt sterilization with synthetic hormones. In fact, throughout the war, Nazis had also been seeking an effective method for sterilizing Jewish women, which they soon found to be a synthetic hormone by the name of, and I'm going to butcher this, ethinyl estradiol.
Ethinyl estradiol.
So, using the same synthetic hormone in their new pill, Rock and Pincus took their team to Boston to test the new drug and immediately failed. Every single woman in this study became incredibly sick and dropped out. Strange. After taking some notes from the Boston study, Pincus and Rock decided to take a trip to Puerto Rico, where they could test their new concoctions completely free of the prying eyes of those pesky Americans. And if you want to lose sleep tonight, read about those tests in the links below. However, a quick overview is this. The researchers essentially drugged women who had just given birth and told them that the pills would keep them from having children they couldn't afford, then watched as at least 5 died. And even worse, Pincus and Rock's team had buried them to prevent them from being autopsied. And what's even scarier is that we truly have no idea what happened to the other women. Leaving Puerto Rico and coming back to America, Rock and Pincus decided to reduce the amount of synthetic estrogen in the pills, and with some falsification of test results, got their new drug FDA approved just a few years later, and with some clever advertising and a healthy dose of lies, had their drug in the hands of countless women by the mid-60s. By the 60s, drug companies were under the eye of America, so much so that Congress began a special investigation that would last 10 years into drug companies' illicit behaviors. Not much would actually come of them, except a small portion of these hearings were dedicated to the birth control pill and the adverse effects it was having on women, and the shady practices drug companies were using to cover them up. For a more in-depth look at the hearings, I would recommend Mike Gaskin's book, In the Name of the Pill. What these hearings revealed was that the drug companies were using faulty data to get the test results they wanted. In fact, the basis for the birth control pill, then and still today, is a 132 women study over the course of 12 months, which for perspective, 132 women is less than the number of women that would die from birth control-induced strokes in the year 1970 alone, the same year as the hearings. And not to mention, 132 women for 12 months is well below the traditional standard for a powerful lifelong drug. And to make matters worse, many of the women who had adverse reactions in this study were incorrectly reported and in some cases completely removed from the study to enhance the appearance of the drug and the drug's safety. In the end though, none of it mattered for the drug companies. They insisted their drug was safe, and when challenged, said that more testing was required. That's the biggest benefit for these companies, because the same company making the drug is also the one testing them and giving that data to the FDA. But for the first time, there was some real honesty. And ironically enough, some of the most illuminating bits of honesty would come from a pro-pill doctor during these hearings named Roy Hertz. And trust me, it doesn't get much more biased in favor of the birth control pill than being a doctor on the Population Council. And even he, when under oath, said this: women on birth control should be regarded as, in effect, a volunteer for an experimental undertaking, and that estrogens are to breast cancer what fertilizer is to the wheat crop. And you know what? He's not wrong.
I'm gonna walk out of here. There ain't a damn thing any one of you can do about it.
You'd think that with doctors referring to a drug as the fertilizer for breast cancer, there would be some more questions. But no, not really, since just a few years prior, the FDA had made an amendment to their rules, which shifted the FDA's focus to how the drug performed during the approval process. Meaning that as long as the test results looked good during the approval process, your drug was going to get approved. And when you're the company making and testing the drug, it means the drug is gonna pass. It's like your math teacher made your exam open notes, then wrote all the answers on the board. In other words, it's impossible to fail. And to make it even sweeter for these drug companies, they had paid off most of the doctors on the Congressional Committee. So the hearings wrapped up with this beautiful bow and a final verdict that birth control was safe within the intent of the legislation, which is completely different than safe. It just means that based on the FDA's new rules, birth control passes those rules. But with that, it was all the drug companies needed to do what they do best: sell drugs. Quickly, the drug companies shortened safe within the intent of the legislation to just safe and began advertising like there was no tomorrow. And just like that, birth control came to be seen as safe by millions of women, with generation after generation being convinced of the same lie. So what does this mean for women? If you want the full details on all the effects of birth control, I recommend strongly checking out the links below. The sad truth though is this: doctors, for the most part, don't let their patients know the potential side effects of birth control. And even when they do, they only cover the least frightening. Typically they are irregular period, nausea, headaches, dizziness, and breast tenderness, which already is a no for me. But what they leave out is far more frightening. So instead of your doctor, some dude named Coop on the internet is going to give you the warning you should have had. And it's quite a long list. Don't worry, gentlemen, your part's coming up next. We just have a little class on this channel, so we wanted to start with the ladies. While on birth control, you should be aware of the following dangers. Migraines. Whether you've had them your whole life or you get them when you start taking the pill, you should know that that's a potential sign of a future stroke. Low estimates are that at least 5,607 women will have a stroke each year in the US because of their birth control. Blood clots. The lowest estimate is that 1 in 3,000 women on birth control will suffer a potential fatal blood clot. And with 18 million women on the pill at minimum, that's 6,000 every year. And for those taking Yaz or Yasmin, the two most common brands of birth control, the risk is doubled. Diabetes. 1 in 5 women taking birth control develop what Dr. Victor Wynn calls chemical diabetes. There's 18 million women on birth control. That's a minimum of 3.6 million women. Heart disease. 3.6 million women developing diabetes on this drug, and drug companies refuse to share heart disease data. We can only imagine it's incredibly high. Breast cancer. In 1970, before the pill was in every household, only 1 in 20 women were diagnosed with breast cancer. Today, it's 1 in 8. That's a 210% increase, or 75 to 80,000 diagnoses every year. A Seattle study showed women on birth control have a 50% increased chance of getting breast cancer. Permanent sterilization. This is a really scary side effect, and there's not a lot of data because pharmaceutical companies also fund a lot of the research into these drugs and the effects. Therefore, if a doctor wants to study how these birth control pills sterilize women, well, you just lost your funding. So most doctors refuse to study the real question. infections. Thus, there can be no accurate percentages. However, if you look deep enough, there is a growing number of women connecting the dots between their birth control and their infertility. Depression and mood disorders. Women on birth control, specifically oral contraceptives, have a 70% increased chance of depression, with women on the patch, another form of contraceptive, seeing a 200% increased chance of depression. Additionally, women on birth control are 50% more likely to develop a glioma brain tumor, autoimmune disease, more than 100 autoimmune diseases, and it's a broad spectrum from hair loss to schizophrenia. 80% of autoimmune diagnoses are women because women have more estrogen, and autoimmune diseases have a strong link to estrogen. Now, if you consider that birth control is just synthetic estrogen, you can do the math. Multiple sclerosis, a disease that attacks the myelin sheath, which is a protective layer around your neurons, eventually causing those infected to be unable to carry out basic life functions. A Kaiser Permanente study showed a 35% increased likelihood of contraction for women on birth control. In 1955, the male to female ratio for MS was 1.4. By 2000, it jumped to 2.3. Crohn's disease, lifelong form of inflammatory bowel disease that inflames and irritates the digestive tract, specifically the small and large intestines. A study done on 250,000 health records by Harvard researchers showed that women who took hormonal birth control for 5 years tripled their risk of developing Crohn's disease. Hyperactive thyroid can present in countless ways. The most common ways are weight gain, water retention, constipation, irregular spotting, decreased libido, and high cholesterol. Sadly, the last trustworthy sources that were unbiased and studied this were conducted in the 60s, well before the pill hit the mainstream. However, even the data then showed a staggering 40% increased likelihood of contraction for women on the pill. Gallbladder stones, exactly what it sounds like. There is a 36 to 56% increased likelihood of contraction depending on the brand, Yaz and Yasmin being the worst. Liver disease. Women on birth control are 500 times more likely to develop HCA, a typically benign liver tumor. However, out of that number, an average of 4% of those tumors become cancerous, and that data is derived from a 1978 Congressional Special Report. No unbiased research on the topic has been done since. Now bear with me, things are about to get even more wild. So with roughly 18 million women using birth control, there's been an even more frightening side effect, and it has nothing to do with women. For a little bit of color, since 1970, when the birth control pill was popularized, there has been a 50+% reduction in testosterone in men. What researchers are finding is that the estrogen in these pills, rings, implants, patches, and whatever else you fancy, isn't all dissolving in the body. Instead, it's entering the water supply, which is really bad. And to make matters worse, synthetic estrogens are 50 to 100 times more potent than natural ones. So some very curious researchers decided to test the effects that estrogen was having on our aquatic ecosystems. So they calculated the amount of estrogen in the water supply of a city of 200,000 people. Then, after setting up control lakes to test their findings against, released EE2, also known as ethinyl estradiol, the exact same chemical formula in birth control pills, and waited for the results, which didn't take long. Dr. Karen Kidd, who led this study, stated that she saw an immediate feminization and transgendering of the male fish, which resulted in what she called near extinction of the flathead and minnow populations. These effects didn't stop there though. They continued up the food chain, causing feminization of the trout, mink frogs, and grain frogs. After these findings, the researchers wanted a real-world test case, and what they found was striking. After testing smallmouth bass in the Shenandoah and Monocacy rivers, the researchers found that 80% of all male bass in these waterways were growing eggs in their testicles. Side note, as a dude, I can't imagine how uncomfortable that would be. Shocked by these results, they tested again, both upstream and downstream from the cities of Denver, Boulder, and Colorado Springs. Upstream meaning before the city sewage enters the water, and downstream meaning after it has entered the water. Upstream, there is a normal 1-to-1 male to female ratio. However, downstream from these cities, which is where the sewage has entered the water, there were 5 female fish for every 1 male fish. And 20% of these dramatically reduced male fish had female characteristics such as eggs in their testicles, and even more shocking, when tested, these male fish were found to have vitellogenin in their systems, which is an egg yolk protein specific to fertile female fish. Well then, what does this mean for us? Unlike the majority of the internet, I won't tell you what to do. All I seek to do is spread the word about things that need to be discussed and art. I've given you the facts, now it's time to act and do whatever you think is right. That being said, I have some theories about why all this is happening. Most of the time when people do evil things, I tend to believe that in one way or another, it's greed. But this goes beyond that. When AstraZeneca, a major producer of breast cancer causing birth control, is the founder of Breast Cancer Awareness Month, something is not quite right. Or when, in 2016, Yaz and Yasmin paid out 10,000 birth control caused blood clot lawsuits for a total of $2.04 billion. Something's not quite right. And it doesn't end there. New lawsuits are filed every single day, which really makes me think, although I believe most people are good, I know there is also a group of people at the top who want nothing more than to destroy the rest of us. Look no further than Margaret, who devised the concept of the magic pill with the goal of committing genocide and sterilizing the globe, or where the dollars came from to fund her magic pill: the Rockefellers, the Ford Foundation, Shell Oil, International Harvester, and countless others. This is what I think, and call me a crazy conspiracy theorist if you'd like. But if you've made it this far, then some part of you agrees with me. Maybe the goal of these corporations isn't to help you, it's to kill you. Kill all of us, slowly but surely. We may never hear from the horse's mouth, but we don't need to. An unknown number of thousands of women are being killed each year from just this one drug, while simultaneously, generation after generation of men are becoming weaker and weaker. We can see it in our ecosystems, we can see it in our society. And if this isn't proof enough that these corporations hate you, well, then this truly will be the pill to end humanity.
Cooper, I'm literally being serious. I'm trying to work. I need you to shut your mouth.